That is true. I would like to spend much more of this morning talking about the ET Nutrigrain than I would anything else, but we won't. Thank you, Flynn. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you guys for coming. I know it's early. I wanted to say, kind of, forgive any hiccups. Usually I kind of talk about how I've been up since 5:30 a.m. Hanging out with my kids, but last night I was actually up at 1:30 a.m. I was saying to Flynn with kind of what was a supposed ear infection, which my 3-year-old said he had, which he didn't at all. It was just a kind of made-up condition, but lasted about an hour and a half. So I am tired, but for different reasons. I've only really just noticed this morning when I was looking at this on the way in as well, how off his face Big Ted looks in this photo that I've never actually kind of noticed. In the back here, which I quite like, because he's just kind of like no pants, you know, an old t-shirt that's too small. It's kind of like spring break, Big Ted. See, this is tired. These are the jokes that in my head worked quite well on the way in. So to Finn's point, I kind of wanted to talk about, when I originally did this talk, I wanted to talk a little bit about what creativity meant to me. I didn't want to show a ton of work because I think you guys kind of have seen, most of anything I would show. Certainly not my own work, but work you've kind of seen online as well. And also it's kind of a lazy way to talk about creativity, I think. So I'm going to show a couple of bits of work, but instead I wanted to kind of talk about what creativity meant to me in the context of what I do. So I want to talk a little bit about how I define it and recognise it, kind of why creativity gets me excited, how I try and aim for it, so what are the kind of processes or methodologies I go through to try and kind of help me get there. And if there's time, we can talk about Game of Thrones. Because there is a whole bunch of shit that I don't understand in Game of Thrones that, you guys probably do. Families, how they connect, the wars, a whole bunch of stuff. So if we can talk about that at the end, it would help me. So when I talk about the context of me, what does that mean? I guess I, to Finn's point, work in a branding agency, and I am a kind of garden variety graphic designer. So I work on a whole range of clients, big and small, little tiny theatre groups through to kind of really big corporates. I work with briefs and I work with clients, and I'm not an artist. And I think that's a really important thing to remember in the context of this talk, because I think we could kind of be here all day talking about creativity unless we kind of confine things and sort of restrict them down to my world, which may sound a little bit selfish, but I imagine it's a world that I share with kind of quite a few of you guys, and it's a world you're probably going to either enter or you're already in as well. So kind of try and remember that the whole time, because I think creativity is a really dangerous topic to talk about in terms of how you can offend people. So I want to talk about it in the context of what I do day to day, which is I'm a graphic designer. Because obviously it means different things to different people. Creativity on Google, not surprisingly, has 26 million definitions, of course. And essentially it does. It means something completely different to everybody. So to kind of get this out of the way, I'm not suggesting for a second if you have a friend that knits kind of, felt and wool and stuff and turns it into meatballs, that she's not creative, okay? Like she is, absolutely. My son brought this home a couple of weeks ago from daycare, which I was told was an octopus, which, to be fair, I kind of was like seconds away from crushing his dreams and ruining his childhood by kind of being really, really harsh on him and saying, mate, this is a styrofoam cup with a bunch of strings stuck to it, but I didn't, obviously. And I also suspect as well that the woman who runs the daycare played quite a big role in the creation of this octopus. But nevertheless, I thought this was creative. I thought this was actually quite a creative thing to kind of be given to. And then I kind of, I started thinking about kids, and I started thinking about the limitless creativity you get with kids and how kind of fascinating it is. I don't know if anybody has kids here. Who has kids? Someone must have kids. You have kids? Yeah, it's amazing, right? So, they kind of, before kids are exposed to the economic limitations of life and the kind of, the restrictions of clients and a workplace, I think you kind of get this level of creativity that kind of then just sort of slowly declines, Andrew was talking to me before about Ken Robinson, talks a lot about it online as well, and the idea that the creativity that kids have when they're really, really young, unless it's kind of managed properly, sort of starts to disappear over time. And I think that's really true, and I'm seeing that a lot in my own children, and it's kind of thrilling to see what's in their head. Last year I went to AG Ideas, and part of AG Ideas was we had to run a workshop with kids where they could they were kind of tasked with designing something that didn't exist that the world needed. And we kind of had to walk around and mentor these kids. They were primary school students, and they were given these giant bits of cardboard. And I could show you kind of 20 of these things that were mind-blowing, but this was by far the best. I kind of went around and saw this kid, and he'd drawn this giant machine. You know, it's got a skateboard, it's got a bin, it's got a blue teddy bear, it's got a thing that says hi. I love in the middle it just says and lots more. It's got a keyboard, and down the bottom here you can see the title. So I kind of was looking at this kid, and he was sort of walking me through it, and I said, what is it? He said, it's the Everythingatron. And I said, 6092 is the model number as well, you can see at the bottom. And I kind of looked at him, I said, oh great, I said, what does it do? And he just looked at me, he said, everything. And it was so deadpan, and so it was almost angry that I'd asked as well, which I found this kind of so immensely satisfying, and it's so far away kind of from what I do day to day as a graphic designer. We'll deal with clients, but I think, but I guess it's another way to look at creativity. I thought we'd go and start with. So if you can kind of put octopuses and meatballs out of your mind, I know it's tricky. I just want to talk about what it means to me day to day, and what I guess what I see as work that is truly creative, and kind of why creativity is I guess if I can hone in on what it means to me in graphic design, why it's the thing I get most excited about in graphic design. But to kind of get there, I want to talk about the things that depress me about creativity. The thing that gets me down the most, more than anything, is the internet. This is what the internet looks like if anyone hasn't seen it. Although obviously none of us have seen it because you can't see it. But yeah, the stuff that kind of gets me down is the internet. You know, it's a blessing and a curse, I think, for designers. You know, so the conversations that you hear young designers kind of having, you know, around the studio and grads is, you know, did you see that thing on September Industry? Yeah, I saw it. Yeah, it's cool, huh? Yeah, I guess. You know, so where it kind of looks like that blue thing you did with the, you know, with the thing and the wrap, and you know, yeah, but mine was online the day before, so it's okay. You know, so these are the kind of debates and conversations we have, you know, with each other as designers. You know, there's constant kind of need to stay ahead of the curve, and the internet kind of ruins that for everybody. You know, that every day, everywhere, everybody sees everything now. You know, and that's an amazing thing, but it's also incredibly challenging, and I think, and limiting for students as well. And then I love that you kind of see all this stuff, and you sit there and you look at it on the internet, and you go home, and I don't know if you guys do. I go home and I kind of lie there and I freak out, and I you know, question my output and my, you know, what I've achieved in my career. And then you go to sleep and you wake up and everyone's done the exact same fucking thing again in another time zone. So you kind of wake up and you're like, I'm ready, I'm good, I'm into it, and you log on and all this shit's been created overnight in Europe, and you kind of, you know, you're behind the eight ball. So I'm just hoping there's a European guy giving a talk right now talking about how we do it in Australia as well. Unlikely though. And then kind of, you know, when things kind of get as bad as they're going to get, you get hit with this sort of shit as well from lecturers saying, you know, don't try to be original, just try to be good. Which I think, you know, I love Paul Rand, obviously. Paul Rand's a highly regarded and well-respected designer for obvious reasons. But this quote has always bothered me, because I think you know, obviously the purpose of the quote is to focus on designing for, you know, the sole pursuit of originality and difference is flawed, and that we should instead just be aiming to do good work. And I get that, but I kind of think it needs to be both. You know, I think I'd be much more kind of engaged and inspired if I was challenged to create something new and it had to be great. You know what I mean? Why can't we be doing both? You know what I mean? I think this idea of not worrying about originality and just striving for goodness is kind of wrong. One of my old creative directors summed up this whole kind of idea of originality and design really, really brutally, but really, really simply, and I really liked it. She kind of grouped all designers into three categories, which was imitators, appropriators, and innovators. And I remember kind of when she said it, I was instantly kind of disappointed in myself, and also quite kind of impressed that she'd managed to kind of succinctly divide everybody into these three categories. And I mean, of course, you know, sadly, most of the time kind of sit in the first two categories. You know what I mean? We all want to live in the third category, you know, and there's a few designers in the world that do, and there's a bunch of people that do that are creative, but generally we all are kind of imitators or appropriators. And then there's this kind of sliding degree of you know, of kind of where you live within those categories as well. You know, and everybody's guilty of it. I think last year I worked on this project with a guy that I was working with, which was kind of like us kind of making all these statements about what we thought were, you know, what the things that we wanted to avoid in graphic design, and the trends, and this newspaper that talked about, you know, all the things that you shouldn't be doing, all the things we didn't want to do that we thought we could kind of head towards a more original set of work for the year. And kind of literally he was designing this on one side of the studio, and on the other side of the studio I was designing this brand for Brisbane that was literally contradicting what we were kind of complaining about in the newspaper as well. So we're all a little bit guilty of it. I think kind of students especially spend their formative years for very good reasons, kind of looking at design they admire, figuring out how to kind of be influenced by designers and how to take everything they see online and kind of use that and appropriate that themselves. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I'm not suggesting there's not creativity and appropriation. Of course, there absolutely is. The idea that you could take something that people are familiar with and completely kind of disrupt that and represent it in a new way is a completely valid form of communication. And I think more and more people who find sort of unique ways to do that are being celebrated appropriately. I think it's actually a really good thing. And the suggestion that every single element of every single project, what it says, what it looks like, how you've shot it, how you've built it, kind of what package it comes in. The idea that all that stuff should be completely new and not been seen before is absolutely absurd. I think that we would kind of go insane if that was the expectation. So I'm certainly not suggesting that. But I also think if there's no attempt, at least in part, to forge new ground or make something new, then I don't really see the point. Because I think that striving for some level of originality in a portion of what we do has to be part of what we do. Really good example of that is the kind of penguin book covers. Everybody's seen these penguin book covers. This was kind of just the first one I found when I went onto a blog. And I love this. When I first saw a penguin book cover, like a classic penguin book cover reappropriated into a modern context, I was like, shit, I wish I'd thought of that. I think it's a really lovely kind of way to take something that everybody's really, really familiar with and kind of reappropriate it, reinterpret it, and make it new. And I remember thinking that was great. I wish I'd had the kind of vision to do that, and I wish I'd kind of thought of it. But 5 years later, when you go online, you kind of see a bunch of penguin book covers redone again. I kind of think, really? Like, are we still I'm sorry if anybody's reappropriating penguin book covers here. No one is, are they? For their major project? No. That would be a buzzkill, wouldn't it? But I think that's a little bit depressing. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that idea of completely retreading ground that has been covered with absolutely no desire to go off on your own in any way is a bit of a bummer. There's also the argument, I think, that people use there's no such thing as an original idea, which I think, again, is a very dangerous kind of way to look at it. On the one hand, you have people that, okay, everything's a remix, we're all influenced by what we do, nothing's an original thought, and I find that utterly depressing. You know what I mean? When I sit down with people and they go, look, you know what? Everything's been done. All you have to do is kind of take it and mash it up and make your own version of it. And I think I understand the argument, but I think it's a really, really depressing way to kind of look at it. You could argue as well that I am the amalgamation, kind of to know of several people and several kind of influence as well, both in terms of context and music and how I talk and how I look and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, there's an element of truth in that. But I also kind of consciously try to put my own spin on that. You know what I mean? I try kind of in the absolute depths of my core to not be exactly like anybody I've ever met. You know what I mean? Because I think that's really kind of depressing. And I think that striving for that level of innovation, striving to kind of inject a little bit of that into what you do is absolutely important. I think the other reason that people kind of get freaked out by it is because it's hard. Again, I think if you think back to kind of my point, what I made about how the sort of confines and the restriction I work with day to day is that for me, innovation has to be taken into consideration with a number of things. You know what I mean? Like I'm not kind of just going out there and building like a giant donkey out of wire and photographing it. I've got clients' needs. I've got my own kind of vision for what work should be, and I've got a deadline to work with, and I've got either a lot of money or not a lot of money or kind of somewhere in between. And that becomes really, really hard. So you're worried about all these things as well, and then you have somebody or you have something in your brain that says also, while you're at it, just try and invent something that no one else has ever seen before. And that's really scary. That's kind of really, really hard. But I think that's the space that we all want to be in. That to me is the innovative space. And it's not 100% of what we do. It's not, it may not even be 50% of what we do, but it has to be a percentage of what we do. And it's work to me that is original and it communicates and it's appropriate. And I think that to me is creativity at its most glorious. And I think that those three words kind of sound like fairly easy things to deliver. You know what I mean? Like when I was a young designer, I was kind of like, yeah, it's original, I haven't seen it before, it communicates, and yeah, it's right for the client. But when you kind of really, really examine kind of what the definition of those words are, have you actually delivered some portion of what you do to be completely new? That in itself is really, really hard. It's a really, really big challenge. is it work that communicates, not just to other designers? Is it work that actually communicates and is accessible by lots of people? And is it appropriate? Is it actually right for the job? Is it something that is actually going to deliver? Is it a product that's going to communicate? Is it an item that's going to sell? Is it, if it's a piece of advertising, is it going to communicate to people and make them want to buy something? If it's a piece of design that is to move somebody, is it actually going to move them? You know what I mean? Or is it going to be something only you understand? I think that to me is kind of where I get most excited. And as I said, that can be a piece of writing that I've never read before, or a piece of language that's kind of been constructed in a way that I'm not familiar with, or it could be a style of photography that you're not familiar with as well. But I think the overwhelming thing is thinking this has to be everything we do. But what's the absolute achievable and desirable part is it has to be part of what we do. I think as well that innovation is kind of a scary word because people think about iPads and they think about kind of electric cars and Everythingatrons and stuff like that. And I think people kind of forget that innovation can be small experiences. Well, for me, it can be small experiences because innovation to me means the new. You know what I mean? It means taking the familiar or taking the unknown and making it new and presenting it to me. This is a business card for a girl I used to work with, which I love, who was a designer at Moon when I was at Moon. And she resigned, and she went to award school, and she kind of quit being a designer. She wanted to be an art director. She did award school. I don't know if anyone knows about award school, but you basically go through award school, you go to your graduation night. It's this big, cheesy networking thing where you're meant to get a job, and you kind of, the top 10 people are announced, the number one person's announced, and everyone kind of networks, and the top 10 person gets a job, top 10 people generally kind of get jobs, top 20, if you pass, you probably, things are going to be a little bit hard for maybe a while, or you fail and you just get pissed. And I love this because she actually took this kind of tick box device into her networking, and this was kind of the card she handed out. The great thing was she came top 10, so she ticked that box, and she got really, really drunk as well, so she ticked the bottom box as well. So this card, I think aesthetically to look at is really kind of nothing. You know what I mean? There's nothing there. The type's familiar. It's kind of black and white. You could argue the hierarchy of information isn't really even that appropriate, but what she's saying to me was completely new, and it was really, really surprising. And it reveals far more about her personality than any kind of aesthetic treatment or any kind of sort of, level of embossing or any of that kind of stuff that you could really go for as well. So having said that, you could go completely the other way and do something that, that looks like nothing's ever been, something she's never seen before. But for me, kind of the idea that she managed to say something that no one else in the room was probably saying, said more about her personality than anything that kind of looked a certain way would. So for me, if the message is familiar, it's about making sure that the voice is new, and vice versa. If your voice sounds familiar, make sure your message is new. And I think what that kind of means to me is that if you find yourself kind of trading in aesthetics that feel familiar, make sure that what you're saying is something that no one else has said. You know what I mean? And if you find yourself saying something that you've heard 1,000 times before, thank you, for the love of God, make sure it looks like nothing that anyone has ever seen before. Do you know what I mean? That kind of really simple kind of debate that you can have between aesthetics and message, and form and function, to me is a really kind of, it's a much more, I guess it's an easier way to kind of get into the idea of innovation and newness. I guess for me, and again, I'm kind of selfishly talking about my own sort of personal interpretation of this, is that for me, the imitation and appropriation of aesthetics is kind of quickly forgiven. When it's accompanied by innovation of an idea or message. Do you know what I mean? So if I kind of interact with a piece of design and I feel like something's being said to me or something's communicating to me in a way that hasn't been communicated, but it's kind of packaged up in a way that feels familiar, I'm less concerned with the look and feel of something. And similarly, if something's being said to me that I've heard 1,000 times before, but it's done in a way that I've never ever seen, then I get kind of really excited as well. Obviously, the holy grail is if you can do both. If you can say something that's never been said before and say it in a way that no one's ever said it, then that's as good as it gets. That's the holy grail of kind of communication design for me. But it's hard. It's really, really hard. So it works in both ways. I think I just wanted to show a couple of bits of work. I realise the time has been on since this morning, so we turned the computer on, so it says I've been talking for an hour and 19 minutes. It doesn't, does it? It doesn't feel like an hour, does it? It's good. I wanted to show a couple of bits of work. Has anybody seen this? Just before I boringly explain it? No? Good. This is good. This is exciting. So I saw this kind of float around on blogs about 6 months ago, and I saw it a lot. Like every kind of blog that I went onto that I visited said, here's this kind of this annual report for this solar power company from Germany by an agency called Service Plan. And every time I went onto a blog, I'm like, it's really not that interesting. Like it's a lot of kind of pastel coloured type, and it's I assume it's Helvetica or some sort of something quite close in. And I never really kind of understood it until I came across a blog that actually explained what the project was. And it was an annual report for a solar energy company that is only activated when it's exposed to the sun. And then once I kind of read that, my mind was blown kind of wide open. And this is a classic example of, for me, the aesthetics became so secondary and so not irrelevant, but so secondary to the idea that it just didn't really matter to me, because what they managed to do was inject an idea and find a way to communicate something, an annual report for a solar company, in a way that was so appropriate, so original, and so innovative that it was just, that to me was just kind of the best of the best. I'm going to kind of lazily show a video which kind of explains the process, but I think it's worth watching. It only goes for about a minute and a half. I think I have to click it. Amazing, right? Like if you had one of those ideas in your life, you'd be pretty happy. You know, like I haven't seen a cleverer idea in the last 12 months. You know, I was just kind of blown away, and I think it's just, again, when you think about it in the context of how it looks, is it instantly everybody in the room kind of forgot how it looked straight away. You know, once you kind of figured out it was activated by solar power, you're like, fuck, that's amazing. And it didn't really matter that it was pastels. It didn't really matter that it was Helvetic. It didn't really matter what it looked like. But the idea that they had managed to do it in a way that no one had done it before, you know, was an amazing thing. Everyone's probably seen this bit of work as well. It's from a studio in Melbourne called A Friend of Mine. And again, it's, I guess, at the other end of the spectrum, it's kind of really an exercise in aesthetics. And the reason I loved it is because it takes to me what is one of the most cliched kind of elements of modern graphic design, you know, the vector of the person, and kind of reinvents it in a completely new way. And it manages to say so much about the craft and the kind of and the purpose of the communication, and it does it in a way that feels familiar yet feels completely reinvented as well. And I love this because it actually, you could tell that they did it, and you could tell that they took something that everyone had seen 1,000 times, which was a silhouette of somebody with some scissors, and managed to think of a new way to present that. You know, and I think when you talk about original aesthetics, to me, this is kind of an amazing example of that. So they kind of built all these three-dimensional sets and photographed them as well. So again, you know, purely just to kind of look at, like visually, I'd never seen anything like this. And again, as soon as I saw it, I thought, wow, how come I haven't seen this before? You know, how come no one's thought of this? How come I haven't thought of this as well? And it was, you know, it got a lot of blog traffic, and it got a lot of it won a lot of awards, you know, for a really, really good reason. Again, it's just a classic example to me of taking something that everyone's kind of familiar with and doing it in a completely new way. They're an amazing studio as well. If you guys don't know them, a friend of mine in Melbourne. It's not a friend of mine, that's the name of the studio, a friend of mine. And they do great work. I also kind of feel like creativity can have greater reach within design. I think, and this is kind of offensive, I guess, but too often designers, we're talking to each other. You know, I think we talk to ourselves far too often. And you're all kind of thinking that's rich coming from me with my guidelines and my cynical newspapers, which it is. But and to be fair, I love that we have an industry that we all understand, that we can talk about and we can trade on. We have secrets, and we have jokes that only we understand, and we have kind of references that only we get. But I kind of think that can't be all we do. And I'm always worried when I meet designers and I see work, and that's kind of all it is. You know what I mean? I think that kind of the aesthetic subtleties of what we do are often lost on people. You know, not always, but they're often lost on people. And the people who aren't designers, they're almost always lost. And what's rarely lost on people is what we say. Now, I kind of had a really big argument with a guy the last time I did this talk, who kind of put up his hand. He said, "You're telling me that craft, you know, isn't important." I said, "No, I'm not suggesting that at all. I'm not suggesting that the craft of what we do and the aesthetic subtleties of what we do aren't important. I'm not suggesting that for a second. What I'm suggesting is that can't be all that we trade on. Do you know what I mean? The aesthetic subtleties and the nuances of a ligature can't be all you kind of hedge your communication on for your whole career. It has, we have to say more than that. I look at the same blogs that everyone looks at here. I look at type and color and imagery, and I look at projects that are solely based on aesthetic communication. And I'm not talking about that stuff. I'm talking about day-to-day communication, commercially aware graphic design has to be about more than just the nuances of aesthetics. Because if it's not, then I think we're running in the wrong direction. And it's where I get most excited. It's where I get most excited about design. I think it's where the opportunity lies most in design. And it's where kind of shock horror we can learn from advertising, which I know is a terrible thing to say in a room full of designers, but it's true. I think what advertising creatives and what the ad industry has kind of always understood for a long time in this country and around the world is that to communicate to a lot of people, you have to talk to a lot of people. And I think designers, certainly in this country, we don't embrace kind of mass market communication, you know what I mean? We kind of cast our net out, I think, too often to just other designers, and we're kind of concerned with capturing our peers' attention, we're capturing, other designers' attention as well, and everybody does it. I do it from job to job as well, where it's appropriate, but I think we have to have broader reach than that. There's no reason we can't have broader reach than that. And I think language is a way into that. I think we spend an incredible amount of time figuring out what our work looks like, and we don't spend enough time figuring out what our work says. I think I kind of always talk about designers figuring out how to write and how to use language in communication as well. And I think too often, certainly in this country as well, it's not something that's celebrated, it's not something that's kind of laboured, and I think it's kind of something that designers think that isn't their responsibility, or it's too hard, or they don't really understand, or someone else will do it. But it's, to me, communication, written communication is valid, if not more valid, than colour and type and photography and layout, all those kind of skills and all those mediums that we're so passionate about. We need to spend as much time figuring out what we're saying as we are how we're saying it. I want to show a little bit of advertising that kind of, again, supports this whole kind of, aesthetic versus idea point of view. These were ads. I don't know if anyone's seen these ads for a a Swiss life insurance company. Which to me, when I read these again, I just wanted to kind of punch myself in the face. Really with how kind of disappointed I was that I hadn't actually come up with it. And they are essentially, the tagline's a bit hokey, for all life's twists and turns. But it's essentially this language device that takes a situation, puts it in the context of life insurance and completely twists it, inverts it. And it, to me, was just kind of, again, mind-blowingly clever. If I had kind of managed to write like this, I'd be a very satisfied, relaxed person. That's kind of my favourite one there. You are the only woman I love a man now. The idea that kind of language, and again, you kind of forget instantly what this stuff looks like. You know what I mean? You kind of forget instantly that it's a serif type. You forget instantly what the logo looks like. And I'm not saying that stuff isn't important. We've got to be really clear about that. I'm not suggesting that the two are exclusive and that they don't need to work hand in hand. What I am saying is that the communication has to be considered as much as the aesthetic. And it sometimes, and it's certainly in my case, and it's a personal thing, is that often that communication overtakes an aesthetic. And I get far more out of reading something like this than I do looking at a kind of, a triangle floating in space, which you see a lot of as well. So I've kind of come to understand this, that I am really, I think, almost more excited about what design says than I am what it looks like. And that, again, it's a personal thing. It's kind of how I feel about creativity and design. And for me, it's this is kind of where the opportunity lies, you know what I mean? I kind of think we spend, again, far too much time trying to figure out new ways to make our work look. But if we spend as much time trying to figure out what we're saying and trying to make that different, I think there's actually, it feels a little bit more scary, but I think there's actually a lot of opportunity in that for originality and creativity. And it should feel hard. I believe kind of if we're doing it right, that it should feel difficult and it should feel exhilarating. And most importantly, it should feel new. Do you know what I mean? So if you feel like you're kind of labouring something you've seen 1,000 times, if you feel like you're saying something that's been heard 1,000 times, then it's not going to feel new. And the level of satisfaction and the thrill, I think, that comes with with real creativity and the real introduction of something new is kind of the most satisfying thing, the most satisfying feeling I have when I work as a designer. So yeah, that's it from me. Okay, thanks for having me.